This video is powered by the pros at Pascal Air Plumbing and Electric. Arkansas owned, Arkansas operated. GoPascal.com.
Andrew Ellis is on halftime. He is covering Arkansas athletics at HawgSports.com on the 24/7 Sports Network. Covers all the sports, but heavy into baseball right now, especially with the scrimmage going on later this afternoon. I'm assuming, Andrew, that you will be in attendance for this scrimmage, because why not? You get to watch the guys play ball today.
Well, actually, I hate to break it to you, I am on my way to Waco at the moment. I'm going to miss this weekend's scrimmage, and I'm really disappointed about it. But duty calls. So I'm currently at a Dairy Queen on my way to Waco, doing this show, and but I'm doing great, and I'm disappointed I'm missing baseball, but I'm ready to talk some ball for sure.
Hey, if you're going to miss the baseball scrimmage, it might as well be for a really big basketball game in the regular season on the road. And I'm sure you're going to find like another 28 Dairy Queens between where you are right now and Waco, because they are all over Texas, man, all over the place. And we'll get thoughts on we'll get some thoughts on the basketball game in a moment here. Baseball, I've been doing for the last week and a half or so, one thing that I feel I know about this Arkansas baseball team and one thing that I'm not sure about. So I'm going to ask you the same questions here. Give me one thing about Arkansas baseball right now that you feel really confident about.
Well, I think the most obvious thing, and I think the answer most would say, is that the pitching staff, the depth of it. And, I think there's plenty of options, in the starting rotation of just big time. They have such a good mix of arms, with power arms, with guys like Jackson Wiggins and Brady Tiger and Hagen Smith, and even a JUCO guy in Hunter Holland. There's so many different guys that have that just typical starter power stuff. But you also have your Will McIntyres and your Zach Morrises, kind of your strike thrower veterans that'll mix speeds and stuff like that. And then just so many, they brought in a guy, Cody Frank, who can kind of fill different roles for them. Has had some starting experience in the past, could close games for them. And, a guy, Austin Ledbetter, who's a guy that got some run last year, and we saw him pitch in Omaha, and he's a guy I'm pretty high on that I think he could step into a real role as a sophomore. So, you just go through the list. There's so many names and so many options, and I know preseason it seems like that all the time, and then you get into the season and you really can only count on a few arms here and there. But I think this year more than ever, I think Arkansas has more options than they've ever had with the pitching staff, and I think you have a lot of different guys who could fill different roles. And it's going to be interesting to see how Coach Van Horn and Coach Hobbs go about determining roles and how long it takes for them to kind of figure out who their top three starters are and who fills in where in the bullpen. But, there's just such a good mix of skill sets, and it's just so deep top to bottom with guys with proven experience that's the one thing that no matter what else happens with this team, I just feel like they have such a high floor because of how good that pitching staff is going to be.
Well, Dave has talked quite a lot about Will McIntyre and that he wants him to be a starting pitcher, which means he wants him to be a weekend starter, not someone that he's going to throw out there Tuesdays and Wednesdays, unless you're pitching on a Tuesday or a Wednesday in Omaha. And I think the fact that he pitched well in the College World Series against Auburn last year, and that's an Auburn team that can hit, and I think so much of it also has to do with the fact that he throws strikes on a consistent basis. But his stuff is good. It's not quite the same as the rest of them. And so what that also tells me is that he's almost like an example for anybody that's on the team when you're trying to refer to, well, you might be a thrower. We need you to be a pitcher. Like what we hear about Wiggins right now. Fire-breathing dragon kind of an arm, 99, 100 miles an hour, wasn't really sure where it was going. He's a thrower. I hear he's more of a pitcher now, but again, I got to believe it when I see it. McIntyre is the epitome of a guy who pitches. He's always had to pitch because his stuff has been just a little bit shorter than like most other pitchers, I think, on whatever team he's played for.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that Will McIntyre is also a guy who's just earned his stripes, and I think that if there's any pitcher on the roster who's kind of earned any benefit of the doubt in terms of trying to figure out starters, who better than a guy who, if you think back to last year, by the end of the season, he was as reliable as any arm on the entire roster. Elimination game in Omaha, pitching 7 strong innings. It doesn't get any bigger than that. And when you have a guy who's done that and has had to work for everything he's gotten, it's just hard to not have some faith in that guy. And I think also what it comes down to with Dave, and he's talked about this a lot before, is, starting Will McIntyre allows them to leave some of those power arms that I mentioned earlier in the back end of the bullpen where, a guy like Brady Tiger, I believe he has starter-type stuff, and I think he can mix speeds well enough, and he could be a guy that I think he could thrive in that role. And part of me wants to see him in that role to see what kind of ceiling he could have there as a starter. But I think also it's just easier to have a guy like that and say, hey, 8th and 9th innings are yours. Just go let it eat. Just go do what you got to do. And I think Hunter Holland's another guy that, he's a guy that, from Stan Jack that they're really high on that, I think he was even better than they expected. Him and Cody Adcock, who also came from the JUCO ranks. And those are kind of your typical power arms that, can mix speeds and probably could be a starter if you needed them to, but you probably get more out of their skill sets if you have them in the back end of the bullpen and you're allowing them to just kind of go in there and let it eat late in the ball game. And like Dave said the other day in his press conference, that's when the games are going to be won is with the bullpens and kind of late as you get to the later innings. And I think this team has so many options, and I think it's going to be really beneficial if Wiggins can take the step that they're hoping he takes, if Hagen Smith continues to be who he is, and Will McIntyre can fill that third starter spot. I think it allows them to have even more options at the end of games, which is going to be huge for them.
Where does Dave Van Horn rank as far as SEC coaches, and is the only thing left to do on his resume is to win a national title?
I mean, it's kind of an obvious answer, but yes, that's all there is left for him to do. As far as where he ranks among coaches, I mean, it's tough to tell.
Just in the SEC,
I don't know
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many good options. I mean, you think about a guy like – it's so difficult how it changes year to year because you think about a guy like Mike Bianco. This time last year, I don't think there would be anybody who would have said Mike Bianco is higher on their all-time list. I mean, Ole Miss fans were ready to run that guy out of town. Phil, I know you were in Hoover. I mean, I remember when Ole Miss was in Hoover, they were ready to be done with Mike Bianco. And then, a few weeks later, he's a national champion. So it can turn that quickly. I view Dave in such high regard, and I mean, I know all Hog fans do, and I know most around the country view him in high regard. Is he the best coach in the SEC? I don't know. I think that's for I'll let other people have those debates, but I feel like Dave is just when you have Dave as your coach, especially these last 5 or 6 years where it seems like he's been rejuvenated a little bit. I just feel like he's going to have your team in position, and he's going to get a lot out of his team, and he's going to have them playing well at the right times. And I think, you can – baseball, it takes so much to win a national championship in baseball, and I think you kind of need to get some breaks that go your way. And I just have a hard time believing that Van Horn is not going to eventually get over the hump there. And I feel like he's got this team in position so often. I think it's just a matter of time. And who knows? I don't know if it's going to be this year, next year, or whenever, but I just feel like with Dave, the formula he's created and just what he's done with this program, it's just hard to bet against that guy, and I don't plan on doing that anytime soon.
So we feel really confident about Arkansas pitching, no doubt. What's a bigger question mark? Would it be the lineup, or is it how they'll play in the field defensively? My answer is in the field, because I always trust it's going to be a team that hits enough to win games. And maybe we were a little spoiled the last couple of years, with the middle infield battles and more, and you had great center fielders, Christian Franklin and then Braden Webb and really good catchers. So maybe we're a little bit more spoiled. I just kind of feel like the bigger question mark is our plays in the field with the glove.
No, yeah, I'm with you 100%. I would agree that I think the infield defense in particular is probably a bigger question mark. And like you said, like the lineup, they just produce more often than not. I think, last year's team, I guess you could say underachieved to an extent in the regular season. And I think this year's team has potential to maybe overachieve what people are expecting just because there's so many new faces and some somewhat unknown commodities like a guy like Tavian Josenberger or Caleb Cowley. Like, I think fans might not know who they are at this moment, but I think once the season gets rolling, they'll see the talent that's in the lineup. And I have no doubt that this group's going to be, very productive offensively, and I think they have good returning pieces to kind of build their roster around. But, I think some people are, everyone knows how good Robert Moore was, and they know how good Jalen Battles was, and even Caden Wallace at third base. I don't think people really understand how special that infield defense was last year, and I think this could be a pretty good infield defense. I don't think they're going to be bad by any means, but I think that people are just going to see the levels to this, and they're going to realize that what Arkansas had last year on the infield was special, and there's still a little bit of a question mark with the catching position. Who's going to win that battle between Hudson Polk and Parker Rowland? Both kind of had their moments in the fall, and Hudson Polk was the better defender in my opinion, but still a little bit of a question mark. Not a ton of experience at that spot, so I'm with you. I think there's definitely more questions to answer in the infield, and Harold Cole is the interesting one to me because his numbers at Sanjak at JUCO, which JUCO numbers can be hit or miss, but Sanjak is pretty reliable in terms of producing big-time talent. And, he was a really consistent defender and solid offensive player. And then he got off to a little bit of a slow start in the field, which kind of paved the way for John Bolton kind of positioning himself as the potential starter at shortstop. But Harold Cole's a guy that I'm a big believer in, his skill set all around. And I'd be surprised if he didn't end up being at least a pretty good defensive shortstop. But I think it's impossible not to take a little bit of a step back from what they had last year.
Is this Peyton Stovall's team? Sophomore captain? That's kind of rare. And I was impressed with how Peyton handled the struggles that he started out of the gate with last season, the finger injury that kept him out for a few weeks, and then, jumping right back into the lineup and being one of the guys that helped carry them through the postseason. And now as a sophomore, he's one of the three captains. So, it really feels like this is Peyton Stovall's team.
No, yeah, it says a lot about him and what kind of guy he is and what kind of leader and player he is that he was voted a captain as a sophomore who, really up until the last few weeks of the season, it's not like he's the can't-miss obvious returner who's, the guy you kind of a default captain. I feel like he really had to earn the respect of his teammates and earn that spot, and he did that. And when you listen to him talk in the press conference today, you kind of see why. You see the leadership qualities and just kind of, what kind of person he is, and it's easy to see why his teammates respect him. As far as his team, that's interesting, but I don't know if there's this team. What I like about this team is that it doesn't seem like there's like a Carson Shaddy type or a Casey Opitz type of guy who's like the vocal guy who's going to lead everyone. It feels like they just have a lot of really solid veteran guys throughout the locker room, both in the pitching staff and in the lineup. And guys with their transfers like Jared Wegner and Tavian Josenberger. It seems like they have a lot of guys who are more of that lead by example type, maybe not necessarily the rah-rah guy, but it just seems like a really adult group. And you just see like guys like Peyton Stovall who are 19 who just carry themselves with such a poise and, they just seem like adults. They're just mature in their approach, and it's just a really good culture that they have, and it seems like it gets the best out of the group year in and year out.
This is a year like it's Omaha or bust, right? Some fans look at it, national championship or bust. I think the program is at a place, and they've been here for a while, where the expectations are to make it to the College World Series, and that's what makes it a successful season. This is the same thing as really the last 5-6 years.
Oh, I think it has to be, and obviously it's not realistic that you're going to go to Omaha every single year. But I'm with you that I feel like that has to be the expectation and has to be the goal. There should be there's no reason for it to be anything less than that. And this team has more than enough talent. I know there's some question marks that we've talked about and some new pieces that fans around the country and even some fans in Arkansas might not be overly familiar with. But there's more than enough talent, especially with the pitching staff. And I just really like the makeup of the skill sets in the lineup. There's absolutely no reason this team can't make a run and make a push. I'm with you. That should absolutely be the expectation and should be the goal. And we'll see if they get it done. I'm cautiously optimistic about this group's chances. I think that some people are going to be surprised with how good some of the pieces in the lineup are. Like I said, I think some people were a little frustrated with last year's team just because there were so many known commodities coming back. So you just assume they're all going to be way better, which is obviously just how we view these things because we just look at returning starters and stuff like that. But I think Arkansas's got more than enough talent in the lineup to really be a team that is in the mix from the beginning to the end.
Has the NIL affected baseball like it has basketball and football? It seems to really be taking over football and in basketball, I guess, because you have a star goes. But in baseball, is it as bad? I use the word as bad, but how is the NIL affected college baseball?
I haven't seen that effect as much, and it's tough to know really what goes on behind the scenes. And nowadays I think there's so many different factors at play where, guys were entering the transfer portal at a higher and higher rates over the last few years, regardless, before any NIL deal stuff happens. So it's tough to tell, like, when Arkansas has a team full of transfers, whether or not that has anything to do with NIL or if that was just kind of the way it played out or just how they wanted to build their roster.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't think it has nearly as much effect, simply just because there's just more money in football and there's more money in basketball. And basketball obviously has had its own. I mean, there's been weird recruiting stuff going on in college basketball for as long as anyone can remember.
And in basketball, and to your point, basketball, one player can really make the difference. In baseball, it's not that way.
Right, and I also just think, like, there's just so much talent across the country in baseball that where it's not like there's such a premium on those top players because, if you just go to the JUCO ranks, there's players that get drafted in top rounds out of JUCOs. Yeah. You go to any conference across the country, there's just so much talent in baseball. So where I don't think I just have a hard time believing a coach like Dave Van Horn is like wanting to go all in to try to get one or two of these top players just because, one, you see so many of them end up going to the draft out of high school or from their JUCO or from their college or wherever. So I just feel like it's less of an effect. And like I mentioned earlier, there's just less money in baseball. And so I guess if there's anyone, I know there's some fans that are a little frustrated with, I guess, the direction of amateur sports and college sports. So maybe baseball is like the last bit of purity we have left, as the old folks say.
Yeah, it's. I was gonna say it's not amateur anymore, Phil. The basketball and football is not. Yeah.
Well, baseball in some terms too. Andrew, we'll leave it there. We're up against the break. Appreciate you. Drive safe. Enjoy all of the blizzards and Dairy Queen treats that you can enjoy on your way down to Waco. Okay.
BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting this season. Everything from the NFL and bowl season to esports. You'll find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends at BetOnline. BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and live scores for almost any sport or game imaginable. We're the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite leagues and events. Head to betonline.ag to join and receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Make sure to use the promo code BELIEVE to receive your rewards. That's BLEAV. Bet online, where the game starts.